bothers you in a way that feels disproportionate, it is not random. It is not because that person is objectively annoying, arrogant, or wrong. What is happening is far more uncomfortable to accept. That person is activating a part of you that you have been repressing for years. Carl Jung called this the shadow. And the shadow is not evil. It is rejected energy. Everything you learn to hide in order to be accepted, loved, and safe. From a very early age, you learned which parts of you were allowed and which were not. Maybe being direct was too much. Maybe ambition was labeled as selfish. Maybe setting boundaries made you cold. Those parts did not disappear. They went underground, into the unconscious, where they watch and wait. When someone appears who allows themselves to be what you denied in yourself, your emotional system reacts before logic has time to intervene. Irritation, judgment, discomfort. Not because that person is the problem, but because they embody something you never gave yourself permission to express. The shadow always projects itself. It never introduces itself honestly. It disguises itself as criticism of others. That is why certain confident women, dominant men, or unapologetic personalities trigger you. It is not simple jealousy. It is internal conflict. It is your shadow saying, "That also lives in you." The conscious mind rushes in to justify the reaction. It looks for flaws. It creates moral stories. She's arrogant. He's cold. They're toxic. But the body already responded. The body recognizes repressed power. And the shadow does not seek peace. It seeks expression. Here is the part most people never understand. The more you repress a part of yourself, the more power you give to those who have integrated it. Not because they are superior, but because they are whole. And a divided psyche always feels smaller in the presence of a unified one. This becomes especially visible in relationships. You feel unsettled around someone who does not over-explain, who does not apologize for existing, who does not shrink to be liked. You cannot explain why, but you feel off balance. That discomfort often turns into silent submission or quiet resentment. Both are ways of avoiding self-confrontation. The shadow does not want to destroy you. It wants recognition. But if you refuse to see it consciously, it will express itself unconsciously. By attracting people who dominate you, by repeating dynamics where you give away power, or by reacting emotionally to situations you do not fully understand. That is why every intense emotional reaction is information. Not about the other person. About you. The real question is not, what is wrong with them? But, what part of me am I refusing to look at? That question changes everything. Jung warned that what you deny will dominate you, and what you accept will transform you. Repressing your shadow does not make you kind. It makes you predictable. And predictability is vulnerability. Anyone who understands where you are split can apply pressure exactly there. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming cruel, aggressive, or dominant. It means reclaiming choice. Being able to say no without guilt. To desire without shame. To occupy space without apology. The person who triggers you today is acting as a mirror. Uncomfortable, distorted, but still a mirror. And as long as you keep breaking the mirror, you will never see your full reflection. The real question is not why this person bothers you. The real question is, which part of your power did you abandon in order to survive? Until you reclaim it, it will keep appearing outside of you, demanding to be seen. If this made you uncomfortable, it touched something real. Subscribe. This is not a place for comfort. It is a place for awareness. Once you begin to see this pattern, you realize something unsettling. The people who irritate you most are not obstacles in your life. They are signals. They show you exactly where your psyche is divided. Think about the traits that provoke the strongest reactions. Assertiveness, emotional detachment, confidence without reassurance, the ability to walk away. These traits feel threatening only when you have disowned them in yourself. Your nervous system reads them as danger because, at some level, you learned that embodying those qualities once came with a cost: rejection, punishment, loss of love. So you adapted. You became agreeable. You became accommodating. You became understanding. And while these adaptations may have protected you early on, They quietly trained you to associate power with danger and submission with safety. This is where the real loss occurs. Not because submission is always wrong, but because it stops being a choice. It becomes automatic, unconscious, and anything unconscious can be exploited. People who have integrated their shadow sense this immediately. They don't need to manipulate you deliberately. Your psyche does the work for them. You hesitate where they don't. You explain where they state. You wait where they act. Over time, the imbalance grows, and you feel smaller without knowing exactly why. What most people call intimidation is often just coherence. A person who has accepted their capacity for anger, ambition, and self-interest does not leak insecurity. Their presence is grounded, and a fragmented psyche feels exposed in front of that. This is why moralizing the shadow is so dangerous. When you label power as bad, assertiveness as selfish, or boundaries as cold, you push vital energy into the unconscious. You don't eliminate it. You exile it. And exiled energy always returns in distorted form. Sometimes it returns as passive aggression. Sometimes as envy. Sometimes as chronic anxiety. Sometimes as attraction to people who dominate you. The psyche is always trying to balance itself, even if the mind resists. Integration begins when you stop asking how to get rid of these reactions and start asking what they are teaching you. The moment you feel that surge of irritation, pause. Not to suppress it, but to study it. Ask yourself, what quality does this person express freely that I restrict in myself? This question is uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of innocence. It shows you where you participated in your own diminishment. But it also gives something far more valuable: leverage. Awareness shifts power back into your hands. As you integrate your shadow, something changes quietly. You stop overreacting. Not because you've numbed yourself, but because there is nothing left to defend. The traits that once triggered you no longer feel foreign. They feel familiar, owned. And when that happens, the world reorganizes around you. The same people lose their grip. The same dynamics dissolve. Not through confrontation, but through internal alignment. This is the paradox Jung understood deeply. The more of yourself you accept, the less controllable you become. Not aggressive. Not dominant. Simply whole. And wholeness is unsettling to those who rely on your fragmentation. That is why this work is never encouraged. It makes you harder to guilt. Harder to pressure. Harder to predict. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your missing authority. And every time someone bothers you, for no reason, your psyche is pointing directly at it. When you go deeper into this, you start to notice that irritation is only the surface emotion. Beneath it, there is often fear. Not fear of the other person, but fear of what would happen if you allowed yourself to be the same way. Jung observed that the shadow is not only made of bad traits. Very often, it contains your strength, your assertiveness, your hunger, your will to take space. These qualities were once discouraged, shamed, or made unsafe. So the psyche learned a rule: if I express this, I lose connection. And for the human nervous system, loss of connection feels like death. So instead of expressing power, you watch it. Instead of embodying authority, you project it. This is why certain people seem larger than life, while you feel invisible next to them. You handed them psychological weight that already belonged to you. This projection creates a strange inner conflict. On one hand, you dislike them. On the other, you are magnetized. You analyze them, talk about them, replay interactions in your mind. That mental fixation is not obsession with the person, it is obsession with the part of yourself you disowned. The psyche is saying, there is something here I need back. This is also why moral superiority is such a common defense. When you tell yourself, I'm not like that because I'm better, you avoid the pain of reclaiming power. But the cost is subtle and long-term. You stay dependent on external validation. You hesitate to act. You wait for permission that never comes. Power that is denied does not disappear. It turns inward. It becomes self-criticism, doubt, overthinking. You attack yourself instead of the world. From the outside, you may look calm, kind, evolved. Inside, you feel tense, resentful, drained. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Many people who appear dominant are not more confident than you. They are simply less divided. They accepted that they can be selfish, ambitious, and assertive, without collapsing into guilt. This is why integrating the shadow is not about becoming cruel or manipulative. It is about becoming honest. Honest about your capacity for impact. Honest about your desire to influence outcomes. Honest about your anger, your ambition, your boundaries. Once you allow these traits into consciousness, they stop leaking out in distorted ways. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to prove anything. Your nervous system no longer signals submission by default. People feel this immediately. Conversations shift. Eye contact changes. You are no longer performing niceness to stay safe. You are present. And presence is felt as authority. This is also why shadow work changes your relationships without you trying. You stop attracting the same dynamics because the internal agreement is gone. The role you unconsciously played no longer exists. The moment you reclaim your shadow, you stop asking, "Why do they treat me like this?" and start realizing, "This no longer fits who I am." That realization doesn't come with drama. It comes with calm. And calm is the clearest sign of integrated power. So the next time someone irritates you, don't rush to label them toxic, arrogant, or wrong. Pause. Notice the intensity of the reaction. That intensity is proportional to the amount of power you gave away. Your shadow is not asking to be eliminated. It is asking to be included. Because the parts of you that disturb you in others are often the exact parts that would make you unshakable. Once they are yours again. Once you truly understand this mechanism, you start seeing it everywhere. Not just in one person, not just in one situation, but as a repeating pattern across your life. The coworker who triggers you. The friend who dominates conversations. The partner who subtly controls the emotional pace. Different faces, same sensation. Tight chest. Internal contraction. Silence where words should exist. This is not coincidence. This is structure. The psyche is economical. It repeats what has not been resolved. And unresolved shadow does not fade with time, it grows more strategic. It waits for similar scenarios to emerge so it can be expressed indirectly. Through irritation. Through envy. Through moral judgment. Through withdrawal. What most people never realize is that irritation is not weakness. It is information. But only if you stop numbing it with explanations. You tell yourself stories to stay comfortable. They are insecure. They are narcissistic. They remind me of someone from my past. These explanations sound intelligent, but they function as anesthesia. They keep you from asking the dangerous question, what do they dare to express that I do not? That question threatens the identity you built to survive. Because somewhere early in life, power became unsafe. Maybe power made you disliked. Maybe it made you punished. Maybe it isolated you. So your nervous system learned, do not stand out. Do not confront. Do not want too much. And that lesson worked. It kept you connected. It kept you accepted. But it also amputated part of your psychological strength. Jung understood this deeply. He warned that a person who represses their shadow becomes morally inflated on the surface and psychologically fragile underneath. They appear harmless, but they are easily dominated. Not because others are strong, but because they refuse to occupy their own space. This is why shadow repression always leads to submission dynamics. Not submission in an obvious sense, but subtle submission. You defer. You over-explain. You seek approval before acting. You wait for signals that never arrive. Meanwhile, the person who integrated even a small portion of their shadow does not wait. They move. They decide. They speak with fewer words. And because the psyche reads certainty as safety, others adjust around them. This is the brutal irony. People think dominance is about force. It is not. It is about internal coherence. When someone has accepted their aggression, their desire, their ambition, there is no internal war. No hesitation. No leaking anxiety. Their body is aligned with their intention. And alignment is felt as authority. Now here is where it becomes uncomfortable. Many people who irritate you are not abusing power. They are simply using it. And what hurts is not their behavior. It is the contrast. The contrast between what they allow themselves to be and what you keep locked away. So the psyche reacts with resentment. Resentment is the emotion of denied permission. You denied yourself permission to be bold, to be selfish when necessary, to take up space without apology. And every time you see someone doing it freely, your shadow bangs on the door from inside. This is why spiritual or nice identities are often the most shadow-heavy. When kindness becomes an identity rather than a choice, it is usually guarding against aggression. When humility becomes a mask, it is often hiding ambition. And the shadow does not forgive this betrayal. It waits. It waits until you feel small, until you feel overlooked, until you feel invisible. Then it expresses itself as bitterness, passive resistance, emotional withdrawal, or self-sabotage. This is why people say, "I don't know why I keep ending up in the same situation." You do know. But knowing it consciously would force you to give up who you think you are. Shadow integration does not make you dark. It makes you whole. And wholeness is dangerous to systems that depend on your submission. Once you begin reclaiming your shadow, something subtle but irreversible happens. You stop negotiating your worth internally. You stop asking, "Is it okay if I want this?" The desire appears, and you listen. This does not make you reckless. It makes you grounded. You become less reactive because you are less divided. Less offended because you are less fragile. Less manipulable because there is nothing left to exploit. And here is the paradox. When you stop trying to be powerful, power arrives. Because you are no longer split between who you are and who you pretend to be. The people who once triggered you begin to lose their grip. Not because they changed, but because the projection ended. You took back what was yours. And without projection, there is clarity. You see people as they are, not as symbols of what you lack. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of comply. This is why Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Irritation is the unconscious knocking. The question is no longer why does this person bother me? The real question is what part of me is ready to return. Because once it does, you will notice something unsettling. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself. You no longer rush to be understood. You no longer shrink to preserve harmony. And the world responds accordingly. And when that part returns, it does not arrive gently. It arrives with tension, with heat, with a strange sense of relief mixed with fear. Because the shadow does not ask for permission. It asks for recognition. At first, you may feel it as discomfort in moments where you would normally stay quiet. Your body leans forward instead of pulling back. Words rise to your throat before you censor them. You hesitate, not because you don't know what to say, but because you know exactly what you want to say. This is where most people retreat. They mistake this sensation for danger, when in reality it is alignment. The nervous system is recalibrating. It is learning that expression does not equal abandonment. That power does not automatically lead to loss. But this learning requires something most people avoid, tolerating internal friction without collapsing into old identities. Because the shadow does not integrate through insight alone. It integrates through action. Every time you suppress the impulse to assert yourself, the psyche receives a clear message: this part of me is not welcome. And every time you act from that impulse consciously, without cruelty but without apology, the psyche reorganizes itself around a new center. This is why shadow work changes posture before it changes thoughts. Your shoulders settle differently. Your gaze becomes steadier. Your voice slows down. You stop filling silence. You allow discomfort to exist in the room without rescuing others from it. And something interesting happens when you do this. People begin revealing themselves faster. Those who benefited from your self-suppression feel uneasy. They may label you cold, distant, or arrogant. This is not feedback, it is withdrawal of access. They are responding to the loss of unconscious control. Others feel safer around you, even if they cannot explain why. Because your presence is no longer fragmented. You are not performing calm while hiding resentment. You are not performing kindness while swallowing anger. You are congruent. Congruence is rare, and the psyche is drawn to it instinctively. This is why the shadow is always connected to power. Not power over others, but power over oneself. The power to remain intact under pressure. The power to disappoint without collapsing. The power to choose instead of appease. Most people confuse morality with repression. They believe that being good means being harmless. But harmlessness is not virtue, it is lack of capacity. True morality only exists when you are capable of causing harm and choose not to. Jung warned that the individual who does not know their own darkness walks blindly into it. They project it onto others, fear it, obey it, or become fascinated by it. But they never command it. This is why shadow repression makes you vulnerable to domination. Not because you are weak, but because you outsource your strength. You look for it in others. You submit to those who seem to carry what you disowned. And the moment you take it back, the hierarchy shifts. Not externally at first. Internally. You stop asking yourself how to be liked and start asking how to be true. You stop managing impressions and start managing energy. You choose fewer relationships, fewer conversations, fewer obligations, but each one carries more weight. This narrowing is not loss. It is concentration. Power always concentrates before it expresses. And now comes the part few people talk about. When you integrate your shadow, you will lose certain versions of yourself. The agreeable one. The always available one. The emotionally flexible one who bends to maintain connection. These identities served a purpose. They protected you when power felt unsafe. But protection becomes prison when the threat is gone. So there will be grief. Not dramatic grief, but subtle mourning. You may miss being liked without effort. You may miss the predictability of being needed. You may even miss the moral superiority that comes from feeling victimized. Yes, victimhood has psychological rewards. It absolves responsibility. It gives meaning to suffering. It preserves innocence. But it also freezes growth. The shadow does not negotiate with innocence. It demands maturity. And maturity means accepting that your passivity was not imposed, it was chosen. Chosen because it was safer than risking rejection. Chosen because it maintained an image you depended on. Chosen because power felt lonely. This realization stings. But it also liberates. Because once you see that submission was a strategy, you are no longer trapped in it. You can update the strategy. You can choose differently. And when you do, the people who once irritated you lose their symbolic charge. They become ordinary, flawed, limited, human. Irritation fades when projection ends. You are no longer fighting them. You are reclaiming yourself. And from that place, something quietly radical emerges. You stop chasing validation. You stop proving your worth. You stop explaining your boundaries. You begin moving with an internal yes or no that does not require consensus. This is not dominance. This is sovereignty. And sovereignty is the natural outcome of shadow integration. Because the shadow was never your enemy. It was your exiled strength, waiting for you to be ready. And when sovereignty stabilizes inside you, the world begins to feel strangely quieter. Not because life becomes easier, but because fewer things hook into you. Fewer situations trigger that old reflex to explain yourself, justify your choices, or shrink your presence to keep the peace. This is one of the least talked about effects of shadow integration, emotional noise drops. The constant inner dialogue. Did I say too much? Did I offend them? Did I miss an opportunity? Starts to dissolve. Not because you stop caring, but because your self-respect no longer depends on constant monitoring. Your psyche stops scanning for threats of rejection. And when that scanning stops, energy returns to you. Most people don't realize how much energy is consumed by self-suppression. Every unspoken boundary, every swallowed reaction, every moment of forced agreeableness drains vitality. Over time, this depletion masquerades as fatigue, boredom, even depression. But underneath, it is unresolved power. Power wants movement. When it is blocked, it turns inward. It becomes rumination, anxiety, Quiet resentment. You feel stuck, not because life is against you, but because your own force has nowhere to go. This is why integrating the shadow often coincides with a surge of momentum. You don't suddenly become reckless. You become decisive. Decisions that once took weeks now take minutes. You feel clarity in your body before your mind catches up. And this clarity changes how others interact with you. People sense when you are no longer negotiating your own existence. They feel it in how you pause before responding, in how you don't rush to fill silence, in how you allow misunderstandings to stand without immediately correcting them. Silence becomes one of your strongest signals. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of choice. This is deeply unsettling to people who are used to reading you, predicting you, managing you. When your reactions become less automatic, control slips. They can no longer rely on your patterns. And here is where many people sabotage themselves again. They feel the shift. They notice others reacting differently. And instead of trusting the process, they retreat out of guilt. They soften prematurely. They over-explain. They apologize for changes that were never wrong. This is the shadow testing your commitment. Integration is not a single insight. It is a series of moments where you choose not to abandon yourself under pressure. Pressure reveals truth. Under pressure, will you return to being palatable? Or will you tolerate being misunderstood for the sake of alignment? Because power requires a tolerance for ambiguity, for being liked by some and disliked by others, for losing access to spaces that depended on your self-erasure. And this loss, while quiet, is real. You may notice invitations stop coming. Certain conversations dry up. Some people drift away without conflict. This is not punishment. It is sorting. When you change internally, the external environment reorganizes itself around your new center. Anything incompatible slowly loses contact. This is why shadow work feels lonely at first. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are no longer available for roles that kept you surrounded but unseen. Loneliness is often the space where authenticity consolidates. And in that space, something important happens. You start trusting your instincts again. Not impulsive urges, but deep somatic signals. A tightening in the chest. A sudden calm. A sense of no that arrives without explanation. These signals were always there. You just learned to override them to maintain harmony. Now, harmony is internal first. And from that internal harmony, external order emerges naturally. You don't need to dominate rooms. Rooms adjust to you. You don't need to convince others. Your consistency speaks. You don't need to control outcomes. Your boundaries shape them. This is the paradox of shadow integration. The less you seek power, the more stable it becomes. Because you are no longer trying to compensate for what you denied. The shadow, once included, stops demanding attention. It no longer needs to provoke reactions in others to be seen. It becomes quiet strength. And quiet strength is what most people mistake for confidence, charisma, or authority. But those are just surface effects. At the core, it is simply this. You are no longer at war with yourself. And when that war ends, everything that once irritated you loses its grip. Because nothing outside you is carrying what already belongs to you. When the inner war ends, a different kind of responsibility begins. Not the responsibility of being good, pleasing, or correct, but the responsibility of being conscious with your power. Because once the shadow is integrated, you can no longer pretend that your reactions are automatic or that your passivity is imposed. You see the mechanics. You feel the choice point. And choice changes everything. Before, when someone crossed a line, your body reacted and your mind justified silence. Now, the reaction still appears, but it no longer hijacks you. You can stay with it. You can decide whether to speak, to disengage, or to let it pass without self-betrayal. This is subtle, but profound. Most people think power is loud. It isn't. Power is the ability to remain present in tension without collapsing into old strategies. To allow discomfort to exist without rushing to resolve it. To let others sit with the consequences of their behavior without rescuing them emotionally. This is where the shadow becomes ethical. Because unintegrated shadow lashes out or submits. Integrated shadow chooses proportion. You no longer need to prove strength by aggression, nor morality by self-erasure. You respond according to reality, not fear. And reality is rarely dramatic. It is often quiet moments where you don't reply immediately, where you say less than expected, where you decline without explanation, where you notice manipulation and simply do not engage. These moments don't look powerful, but they restructure dynamics. Why? Because most social power relies on predictability, on knowing how to push, how to guilt, how to provoke. When those levers stop working, the entire interaction shifts. People either adjust or leave. This is the invisible threshold of maturity. You stop needing to be understood by those who cannot meet you where you stand. You stop translating yourself into smaller versions for comfort. You allow others to have their interpretations without internalizing them. This is difficult at first because the ego wants feedback. It wants reassurance. It wants confirmation that you are still good. But goodness without strength is just compliance. And compliance breeds resentment. The shadow carries the energy of refusal, of saying no without hatred, of holding ground without justification. When this energy is denied, it finds indirect expression, passive aggression, withdrawal, self-sabotage. When it is integrated, refusal becomes clean. And clean refusal is one of the most stabilizing forces in the psyche. You start trusting yourself not because you are always right, but because you are no longer lying to yourself. Even when you make mistakes, they feel honest. They don't fracture you internally. This integrity is felt by others at a nervous system level. They may not articulate it, but they respond to it. Conversations slow down around you. Games lose momentum. People choose their words more carefully, not because you intimidate them, but because you are no longer unconsciously participating in the dance. This is why shadow integration dissolves manipulation. Manipulation requires unconsciousness. It requires unowned desire, unexpressed anger, unacknowledged fear. When these are brought into awareness, the hooks disappear. And then something unexpected happens. Compassion deepens. Not the kind that sacrifices itself, but the kind that sees clearly. You recognize in others the same disowned parts you once carried. You understand why they cling to control, why they provoke, why they dominate or submit. You see the cost of their strategies. But, and this is crucial, understanding no longer equals tolerating. This is where many confuse integration with softness. True compassion does not blur boundaries. It sharpens them, because it respects reality instead of fantasy. You can care about someone and still walk away. You can empathize and still say no. You can love without merging. This is the psychological adulthood Jung spoke about but few reach. And from this place, your relationship to power transforms again. Power is no longer something you seek or fear. It becomes something you steward. You notice when it rises in you, in confidence, in influence, in presence, and you hold it without inflation. You don't need to dominate to feel alive. You don't need to submit to feel safe. You stand. And standing is enough. Because the shadow is no longer pulling you toward extremes. It is integrated into your center. And when the center holds, the world meets you differently. Not always kindly. Not always gently. But honestly. And honesty, in the long run, is the only ground that doesn't collapse under pressure. This is the quiet power of knowing your shadow. Not to wield it, not to hide it, but to live with it consciously. And that consciousness is what most people mistake for confidence, authority, or mystery. In truth, it is simply wholeness. Wholeness changes your sense of time. You stop rushing toward outcomes because you are no longer trying to escape yourself. Urgency fades. What replaces it is precision. You act when action is aligned, not when anxiety demands movement. This alone separates you from most people, because the world is driven by nervous systems in flight. When you are no longer in flight, you become an anchor. And anchors disturb unstable structures. People around you may begin to project more intensely. Admiration, hostility, suspicion, fascination, all increase. Not because you are doing more, but because you are no longer leaking energy. Your presence becomes concentrated. Containment is felt as gravity. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics of shadow integration. As you become calmer, others may become more reactive. As you become quieter, others may get louder. As you become less explainable, others may demand explanations. This is not coincidence. Your regulated nervous system exposes dysregulation in others. Before, you matched their pace. You soothed them unconsciously. You absorbed tension to keep the field stable. Now you don't. And the imbalance becomes visible. Some will try to restore the old equilibrium by provoking you. They'll question your motives. They'll reinterpret your boundaries as arrogance. They'll accuse you of changing. They are right. You have changed, but not in the way they think. You have stopped outsourcing your self-worth. This is intolerable to systems built on hierarchy, guilt, or emotional leverage. When someone cannot be pulled up or pushed down easily, the system loses efficiency. So the system tests you. This is where many people fail. They mistake resistance for a sign they are wrong. They collapse back into old patterns to relieve pressure. They abandon the integration to regain approval. But if you stay, if you hold your ground without hostility, the test passes. And something remarkable happens. The system recalibrates. People who can meet you at this level step forward. Conversations deepen. Interactions simplify. There is less drama because drama requires participation. There is less confusion because you are no longer confusing yourself. Your yes becomes cleaner. Your no becomes quieter. You stop negotiating with internal ghosts. This is when your life begins to feel strangely direct. Opportunities align without force. Conflicts resolve without theatrics. You don't win by overpowering. You win by being unmovable internally. This is power without display. And it terrifies those who rely on display. Because display is compensatory. It exists to cover insecurity. Integrated shadow has no need to perform. It doesn't posture. It doesn't threaten. It simply exists, and that existence sets terms. You'll notice this especially in subtle moments. Someone interrupts you, and you don't rush to reclaim the floor. You wait. When you speak again, people listen more closely. Someone disrespects a boundary, and instead of escalating, you disengage. The absence of reaction does more than confrontation ever did. Someone tries to guilt you, and you acknowledge their feeling without changing your decision. The manipulation collapses. These moments are small, but cumulative. Over time, they reshape your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who reacts to life and start seeing yourself as someone life reacts to. Not because you control it, but because you are coherent. Coherence is the real currency of influence. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions align, there is no internal friction. And without friction, energy flows. This flow is what others experience as confidence, authority, or presence. But again, these are effects, not goals. The goal is integrity. Integrity means nothing inside you is disowned enough to sabotage you from the shadows. It means your anger informs you without hijacking you. Your fear warns you without paralyzing you. Your desire moves you without controlling you. This is the adult psyche. Most people never arrive here because it requires giving up a familiar identity. The victim, the rebel, the caretaker, the pleaser. These identities feel safe because they are predictable. They come with scripts. Wholeness has no script. And that is why it feels empty at first. There is a moment, often overlooked, where the old drama is gone, but the new stability hasn't fully formed. People misinterpret this as boredom, loss of passion, or lack of meaning. It is none of those. It is spaciousness. And spaciousness can feel unsettling if you are used to chaos. But if you stay, something deeper emerges. Purpose stops being performative. It stops being about proving anything. It becomes directional rather than desperate. You don't need to be seen doing the right thing. You simply do it. You don't need constant affirmation. Your alignment is its own feedback. This is when your shadow truly rests. Not because it has disappeared, but because it is finally included in the whole. And a psyche that includes all its parts no longer needs to fight the world to feel real. It stands. It observes. It chooses. And from that place, power is no longer something you chase. It is something that naturally gathers around you. When power gathers around you instead of being chased, a deeper layer of responsibility emerges. Not moral responsibility, but psychological gravity. You begin to notice that your state influences others even when you say nothing. A pause from you can slow a room. A calm response can neutralize tension that would have escalated before. Silence, when it comes from coherence, carries more weight than explanation. This is where many people become uneasy. Because influence without overt action exposes a truth most would rather avoid. Much of social life is regulated unconsciously. Who speaks first, who fills silence, who apologizes, who over-explains, these are not random behaviors. They are signals of internal hierarchy. When your shadow was disowned, you compensated. You filled space to avoid rejection. You justified yourself to preempt attack. You apologized to reduce friction. These habits were not weakness, they were adaptations. But adaptations outlive their usefulness. Once you stop needing them, the system senses the shift. Others may test your availability. They may push subtle boundaries to see if you still respond the same way. You don't. And that absence of reflex creates a vacuum. Vacuum invites projection. Some will project strength onto you. Others will project threat. Some will project judgment. None of it is about you. It's about the parts of themselves that are stirred by your presence. This is why shadow work is not about becoming nice or healed. It's about becoming tolerable to yourself. When you can tolerate your own tension, you stop offloading it onto others. And when you stop offloading, others feel exposed. Exposure creates discomfort. Discomfort seeks resolution. And most people resolve discomfort by trying to control the environment, including you. They may ask personal questions disguised as concern. They may seek reassurance disguised as humor. They may provoke to re-establish dominance. They may withdraw to punish you for no longer playing your role. Each of these is an invitation back into unconsciousness. If you take the bait, the old dynamic resumes. If you don't, the dynamic collapses. This is where restraint becomes crucial. Not repression, restraint. Restraint means you could react, but you choose not to. You are not frozen. You are sovereign. This sovereignty changes how you experience conflict. Conflict no longer feels like a threat to your identity. It becomes information. You observe how others behave under pressure. You notice who becomes manipulative, who becomes avoidant, who becomes aggressive, who becomes passive. And you don't rush to label or fix. You simply note. Noting is power. Because once you see patterns, you stop personalizing them. You stop assuming responsibility for reactions that are not yours. You stop over-functioning in relationships that require mutual regulation. This is especially transformative in close relationships. Romantic, familial, professional, all become cleaner. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer mistake chaos for passion. You no longer equate self-sacrifice with love. Your shadow once drove you toward what felt familiar, not what was healthy. It pulled you into dynamics where your disowned power could be acted out indirectly, through partners, bosses, or authority figures. Now, familiarity loses its grip. You start choosing based on resonance rather than repetition. Resonance feels quieter than obsession. It doesn't spike your nervous system. It doesn't demand urgency. It doesn't threaten abandonment. At first, this can feel underwhelming. The body, used to adrenaline, mistakes calm for lack of chemistry. But chemistry without safety is addiction. And safety without awareness is stagnation. Resonance offers both. It allows desire without desperation. Attachment without entanglement. Closeness without collapse. This is what integrated shadow offers in relationships, equality of presence. You are no longer trying to be chosen. You are choosing. This subtle reversal shifts everything. You listen differently. You speak more precisely. You tolerate less distortion. You exit earlier when something feels off, not dramatically, but decisively. Decisiveness is often misread as coldness by those who rely on ambiguity to maintain control. But decisiveness is kindness without self-betrayal. You are no longer negotiating with potential. You are responding to reality. And reality is always simpler than fantasy. Fantasy says, if I explain better, they'll understand. Reality says, they already understand. They just don't agree. Fantasy says, if I wait, it will change. Reality says, waiting is also a choice. When you see this clearly, your energy consolidates. You stop leaking it into hope, fear, or imagined futures. You bring it back into the present moment, where actual power exists. This grounded presence changes how you experience solitude. Solitude stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like restoration. You enjoy your own company because there is no longer an internal war. The shadow isn't whispering accusations. The ego isn't demanding performance. There is space. And in that space, intuition sharpens. Not intuition as mysticism, but as pattern recognition. You sense misalignment early. You notice incongruence in words and behavior. You trust these signals without needing proof. Trusting yourself is the final outcome of shadow integration. Not arrogance. Not certainty. Trust. And trust allows you to move through the world without constant self-surveillance. You stop asking, how am I being perceived? You start asking, is this aligned with me? That single shift marks the transition from psychological adolescence to adulthood. From there, life doesn't become easier, it becomes clearer. And clarity, while sometimes uncomfortable, is the only condition under which true power can exist. Because power without clarity is violence. And clarity without power is impotence. Integrated shadow holds both, without needing to announce either. And this is the quiet truth most people never reach. When your shadow is integrated, you stop fighting for position. You stop trying to be seen, validated, chosen, or feared. You no longer need to dominate, submit, impress, or disappear. All of that belonged to a psyche divided against itself. What replaces it is inner authority. Not the authority of control, but the authority of coherence. You become someone who does not need permission to exist as you are. Someone who does not negotiate their boundaries in silence. Someone who no longer gives their power away just to feel safe, loved, or included. This is why the shadow is not dangerous when integrated, it is dangerous when ignored. An unintegrated shadow seeks power unconsciously. It leaks through reactions, addictions, passive aggression, envy, and self-sabotage. An integrated shadow becomes discernment, strength, timing, and restraint. And here is the final reversal. The people who once unsettled you no longer do. The ones who triggered you were mirrors. They carried the parts of yourself you had not yet claimed. Once claimed, the mirror dissolves. What once provoked emotion now provides information. What once controlled you now reveals itself. This is freedom at the psychological level. Not freedom from conflict, but freedom from compulsion. Not peace through avoidance, but peace through inclusion. And from this place, your life stops being reactive. Your decisions stop being defensive. Your relationships stop being contracts of fear. You are no longer ruled by what you repress. You are guided by what you integrate. If this perspective resonates, if you sense that your reactions, patterns, and power struggles are not random but meaningful, then you are already at the threshold of deeper awareness. This channel exists to explore that threshold, to expose the unconscious dynamics shaping your power, your relationships, and your sense of self. If you want to continue this work, subscribe. Not for motivation, not for comfort, but for clarity.